A beautiful woman knocked on my door at midnight, soaked in rain, and begged me to marry her within 5 days or lose everything. The knock came just before midnight, hard enough that I dropped the wrench I was holding. I was out in the shop scrubbing motor oil off my hands, rain hammering the tin roof loud enough to swallow the radio, and that knock cut straight through it anyway. Fast, frantic, the kind you feel in your chest before you even reach the door. I pulled it open, and there was Maya Stone, soaked to the bone, hair stuck flat to her face, both arms wrapped around a legal folder gone soft and swollen with rain. My name's Cole Harper. I run a horse operation about 20 minutes south of Missoula, off Highway 93, and up until that exact second, it was shaping up to be a completely ordinary Sunday night. Truck needed an alternator, storm needed to pass. That was the whole plan. I hadn't talked to Maya much since she was a teenager, home from college one summer, tossing hay bales 2 properties over with her dad. David Stone was the best neighbor a man could ask for out here. 8 years back, when my father got sick and the vet bills started eating me alive, David showed up one morning with his own trailer and half his feed budget and told me not to bother arguing. That was just David. A year and a half ago, he dropped dead of a heart attack working cattle, same as every other morning of his life, and half the valley showed up to bury him. I remember thinking the church wasn't built big enough for how many people that man mattered to. "Cole?" Maya's voice was shaking, and it wasn't just the cold. "I need your help. I didn't know who else to call." I stepped back, grabbed the towel off the mudroom hook, put on coffee without asking if she wanted it. Some nights, you can just tell a person needs the coffee more than they need the question. She stood there, dripping in my front hall for a second, looking around like she wasn't sure she was actually allowed in, and I had to tell her twice to come sit down before she moved. She sat at my kitchen table, dripping onto the floorboards while the coffee maker sputtered, and by the time I set a mug in front of her, she already had those wet papers spread flat across the table like she needed to see them laid out to believe they were real. "My father's will," she said. "There's a clause. Nobody said a word about it until the reading last week. Arthur Vance just read it out like everybody already knew, and I about fell out of my chair." I looked down where she was pointing. Dense legal language, the kind that makes you read a sentence twice, so she gave me the short version before I finished the first pass. "If I'm not married by Friday, this Friday, 5 days from now, full control of the ranch goes to Blake." Blake Stone, her cousin. I've met him exactly twice and didn't care for him either time. Which says something, because I don't usually make my mind up about a man that fast. He's already got developers lined up. Her hands were shaking around a mug she hadn't touched yet. Wants to carve the land into housing lots. The stables, the breeding program my dad spent 30 years building. None of it means a thing to Blake. He looks at that place and sees dollar signs. Always has. "How long have you known?" "A week. 1 week to figure out how to save 30 years of my father's life. And I don't have anybody, Cole. No boyfriend. Nobody I'd even consider." She stopped, worked out how to finish it. "You're the only person my father actually trusted. The only one I trust right now, if I'm honest. I need you to marry me." I didn't laugh. I didn't tell her to slow down. I just sat there a second, looking at David Stone's daughter soaked through in my kitchen at midnight, asking me to marry her to save the last thing her father ever built. "You understand what you're asking," I said finally, not a question. "I understand exactly what I'm asking. I've had 4 days to sit with how insane it sounds, and I still don't have a better option. Vance says the clause is airtight. Says my dad's old lawyer drafted it that way on purpose, because he knew Blake would come sniffing around eventually, and wanted a door I could walk through if I needed to. Your dad wrote himself an escape hatch and never told you about it. Guess he figured I'd only need it if things got bad enough. And here we are. A marriage of convenience," she said, quick now, like she needed to get it out before I could say no. "Paperwork, Cole. Nothing more. I know how insane this sounds. I know I'm asking you to blow up your whole life over a Friday deadline that's got nothing to do with you. But you're the only person I know who'd actually do this because it's right, not because you're looking to get something out of it. I thought about David showing up with that trailer, never once making a thing of it. I thought about standing at his funeral, Maya up front in a black dress looking like she hadn't slept in a week, Blake nowhere in sight until the reception, shaking hands and asking somebody's cousin about property values, already circling before the dirt had settled. "All right," I said, "but we do it my way. No lying to each other in this house. Not about this, not about anything. We don't pretend it's love, and we don't hide things. That's the only condition, and I'm not offering it twice." She looked at me like she hadn't actually expected a yes. "Deal." She stuck her hand out across the table like we were closing on a used truck. I shook it anyway. "You know this is going to be a mess," she said, some of the panic finally draining out of her voice. "The town, Blake, all of it." Figured that part out already. We hammered out the details before either of us slept, because 5 days doesn't leave much room to figure things out as you go. "Separate rooms," she said, before I could bring it up. "I don't want you thinking I showed up here expecting anything past the paperwork." "Wasn't going to assume otherwise." "And once the ranch is safe, whenever that ends up being, we go our separate ways clean. No hard feelings. You go back to your life, I go back to mine. We stay neighbors like always." "Fine by me." "I'll pay you," she said. "Whatever this costs you." "No, you won't." Flatter than I meant it, and she blinked. "Your dad put half his feed budget into my cattle one winter and never brought it up again. I'm not taking money for doing the same thing back." She didn't argue that one, just nodded and looked down at the papers like she was trying to memorize every line before Friday could show up and take the choice away. "One more thing," I said. "Whatever Blake throws at you this week, and he's going to throw plenty, you handle it. I'll back you up. But this ranch needs to see you running it, not me standing behind you doing it for you. That's the only way this holds up in front of anybody who matters." "I know how to run a ranch, Cole." "I know you do. I need Blake to know it too. So does every hand on the payroll." She held my eye a beat longer than she needed to, deciding whether to be offended, then let it go. "Fair enough. What about the hands? Do we tell them the truth, or do we let them think what they're going to think?" "We don't lie to them either. We just don't hand out details nobody asked for. If Marcus asks me straight, I'll tell him straight. Man's earned that much." "And if it doesn't work? If Vance says the marriage doesn't count for some reason, or Blake finds some angle we haven't thought of?" "Then we'll have lost fighting for something worth fighting for. Beats not fighting at all." She almost smiled at that. Almost. We drove to the courthouse in Hamilton the next morning in my old Ford, heater running loud enough to fill up the silence neither one of us knew how to fill any other way. 20 minutes down 93, with the Bitterroots still capped white on the far ridge line, and neither of us said much beyond the weather. The clerk, Patty Voss, had stamped half the marriage licenses in Ravalli County over the last 20 years. She looked between the two of us, me in my one clean shirt, Maya in a dress that still smelled like last night's rain, and didn't ask a single question out loud, though her eyebrows had plenty to say on the matter. "You two in a hurry?" was all she said, sliding the paperwork across the counter. "Something like that," I told her. We signed. Maya Stone became Maya Harper on a Tuesday morning under fluorescent lights that didn't care one way or the other what any of it meant. Took about 6 minutes start to finish. 6 minutes to undo 30 years of two separate last names. I've picked up a plain gold band at a pawn shop on the way in. Nothing fancy, because that ring was going to matter a lot more to Blake's case than it would to either of us. She looked at it a second before she slid it on, turning it once in the light like she was checking for a catch, and didn't say anything about it at all. That afternoon she moved her bags into my spare room. 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of framed photographs, David Stone's face looking out of half of them. One at a county fair, one on horseback, one with his arms slung around a much younger Maya in front of a ribbon-winning mare. "You can put those wherever," I told her, nodding at the box. "Whole house is yours as much as mine right now." Thank you. She said it quiet, looking at the box instead of me. For all of it. I basically ambushed you at midnight and didn't leave you much room to say no. You left me plenty of room. I just didn't take it. She set the box down on the dresser and took her time arranging the photographs along the top of it, like she was giving her father a proper spot in the house before she let herself think about anything else that week still had waiting for her. I made elk steaks that first night, and we ate mostly in silence, both of us still working out what we'd signed ourselves into that morning. Somewhere around the second helping, she asked how long the Harpers had run cattle out here, and I gave her the short version. 3 generations. My grandfather, then my father, now me. Probably would have gone that way whether or not a storm ever blew a stranger onto my porch. Does it ever get lonely? She asked. Running a place like this by yourself? Didn't used to think about it much. I looked around the kitchen, aware all at once how long it had been since anybody but me sat at that table. Guess I'll have more to compare it to now. That got a small, tired smile out of her, the first real give since she'd shown up on my porch. We sat there a while after the food was gone, not talking about the Will or Blake or Friday, just the ordinary stuff. Weather and horses and which fence line needed work first come spring. Like 2 neighbors catching up, instead of 2 strangers who'd gotten married that morning. Word travels fast in a valley this size. By the time we hit the tractor supply the next afternoon, it had clearly traveled ahead of us. The cashier, a woman I'd bought oats and fencing wire from for 6 years without a single incident, stared at the ring on Maya's hand a beat too long, then leaned over to whisper something to the stock boy the second she figured we couldn't hear. Maya's jaw went tight. I stepped up next to her at the counter, close enough that anybody watching would know exactly where I stood, and asked the cashier to add 2 more bags of sweet feed. Didn't say a word about the ring. Didn't need to. They're going to talk no matter what we do, Maya said once we were back outside, loading bags into the truck bed. Let 'em. Costs us nothing. We stopped at the diner on Main before heading back. Carol Jennings had been pouring coffee in that building since before I could drive. She set 2 mugs down and said, "Heard congratulations are in order," flat enough that neither of us could tell if she meant it kindly or was fishing. Word travels fast, Maya said. Honey, word travels before it happens in this town. Half the county had you 2 married by Tuesday night before you'd even filed the paperwork. Carol topped off the coffee and studied Maya a second longer than idle chatter usually calls for. You daddy was a good man. Whatever you're doing, I imagine you've got your reasons. That was more than either of us expected, and Maya's eyes went a little bright before she got it under control. Carol moved on to the next table without pushing further, which was about as good an outcome as either of us could have hoped for. Doesn't bother you? People talking? Maya asked once Carol was out of earshot. People have talked about me since I was 19 and rolled my dad's truck into Blodgett Creek. Stopped keeping track a long time ago. That got the first real laugh out of her, small as it was, and something in my chest loosened up a little hearing it. Blake showed up at the Stone Ranch 2 days later in a Cadillac Escalade so clean it had clearly never touched gravel, which, knowing Blake, it probably hadn't. Well, isn't this cute? He climbed out in shoes that cost more than my last vet bill. A courthouse wedding. Real romantic, cousin. Couldn't spring for an actual ceremony? We're married, Blake. That's what the will requires. Sure. He looked me over like something he'd stepped in on his way out of the car. And you, I'm guessing, are getting a nice cut of this ranch for playing along. That how this works, Harper? I've got my own place, Blake. Doesn't need your cousin's land added onto it. Everybody's got an angle. I felt the rest of the answer come up fast and swallowed it whole. Wasn't my fight to win for her, and every hand within earshot needed to see that plain. If I stepped in every time Blake opened his mouth, they'd keep looking to me for the last word, same as they always had with her father. Maya needed them looking at her now. So I stayed put, arms crossed, and let her find it herself. This is my ranch, Blake. Her voice shook a little on the first few words before it steadied. Only thing that's changed is you're going to have to talk to me now, instead of sitting back, waiting for me to fail. Maya, come on, let's not do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm telling you once so there's no confusion later. This isn't a stunt, and it isn't temporary. You really think a shotgun courthouse wedding is going to hold up to scrutiny? You think a judge is going to look at this and see anything other than exactly what it is? I think a judge is going to look at a signed marriage license and a ranch that's fully current on every bill it owes, and I don't think he's going to much care how fast the wedding happened. Blake's grin thinned out a notch. Have it your way, but I've already talked to a lawyer about contesting the marriage's validity. You might want to have Vance on standby. He said it almost bored, like he was mentioning the weather, and climbed back into the Escalade, spraying gravel across half the yard on his way out. Marcus Reed, the head wrangler, had been leaning against the paddock fence through the whole thing, coffee thermos in one hand. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod I'd ever gotten out of him. Wasn't approval of me, was approval of what he'd just watched her do without me doing it for her. He's not going to let this go easy, Marcus said once the dust from the Escalade had settled. No, Maya said. He's not. Marcus tested her the next morning, same as any foreman worth his wage tests a boss he didn't pick himself. He climbed the porch steps and looked straight past Maya at me. Boss, back paddock fence is coming apart at the east corner. Want me to replace the whole run or patch what's failing? I looked at my boots and didn't answer. Wasn't my call anymore, and he needed to learn that quick. Marcus, Maya said, that stretch has been failing section by section for 2 years. Patch it now. We're paying for it twice by fall. Replace the whole run. Marcus studied her a second, like he was weighing something behind his eyes, and I could tell it wasn't the fence answer he was testing. It was whether she'd flinch and look at me first. She hadn't. You sure? He pushed. That's a 5-figure job, and we're already tight on cash flow this quarter. I'm sure. Do it. And Marcus, next time you've got a question about how this ranch runs, ask me, not him. I know he's easier to ask. Ask me anyway. He held her gaze one more beat, then nodded, slow. You got it, Miss Maya. She spent that same afternoon at my kitchen table learning the parts of running a ranch nobody puts in a brochure. Feed contracts, vet invoices that come in faster than cash flow keeps up, how to catch a supplier patting you on the numbers. My dad used to do all this right here, she said, running a thumb along a water-stained corner of an old contract. I used to think it was the boring part. I'd rather have been out with the horses every time. It's not boring once it's yours to lose. It's just math with consequences attached. She caught on faster than she gave herself credit for. By Wednesday, she caught it herself. Western Montana Grain had been quietly rounding up on every invoice for the better part of a year. She got the rep Denny Walsh on the phone. Denny, I've got last year's invoices and this year's side by side, and the math doesn't hold up the way you're telling me it does. Either we go back to the old rate, or I start calling Ranchway out of Missoula. There was a long pause on the other end. Some background noise, a man clearly stalling. I'm not trying to be difficult, Denny. I'm trying to pay what's fair. You tell me which one of those we're doing today. Fine. I'll get it fixed on our end. Old rate. Good. Appreciate you working with me. She hung up and looked at me like she expected me to be surprised. Wasn't worried, I told her, and meant it. The vet bills took longer to untangle. One invoice from the Bitterroot Veterinary Clinic had a line item that didn't match anything Maya remembered scheduling, and instead of paying it just to keep things moving, she called and asked them to walk her through it. Turned out to be a mixed-up file from a neighboring property. Not fraud, but the clinic manager thanked her for catching it and admitted most people just paid whatever number showed up on the page. By the end of the week, Tyler Brooks ran up to the porch about a torn feed bag and a busted tack room latch, and he asked Maya straight, like it had never once occurred to him to ask anybody else. That, if you're asking me, was the real turn. Not the wedding, not the ring. Even the small stuff started falling to her without anybody deciding it should. A farrier called about rescheduling 3 horses for Monday instead of Thursday, and Maya was the one who worked out which animals could wait and which couldn't. A neighbor 2 miles down called about a fence line dispute along the property boundary, an old argument that had been simmering for going on a decade, And Maya drove out there herself, walked the line with him, and settled it in 20 minutes flat with a compromise her father had apparently tried and failed to reach for years. "How'd you manage that?" I asked her that evening. "I didn't try to win. My dad always wanted to win. I just wanted it settled." She shrugged like it wasn't much, but I noticed she stood a little straighter saying it. Blake didn't come back to the property after that, but he didn't disappear either. Wednesday evening, Marcus pulled me aside by the equipment shed, hat in his hands, looking like a man who didn't want to say what he'd come to say. Blake called me direct, offered triple my wage to testify at the hearing that Maya's in over her head, wanted me to say hands were talking about quitting before she took over. My stomach dropped. "What'd you tell him?" "Told him I've worked this land since before Maya could walk, and I know whose hands it's safe in. Told him not to call again." Marcus shifted his weight. "Figured you two should know. Man's getting desperate, and desperate men do ugly things around a deadline." I told Maya that night, at the kitchen table, watched her go pale, then furious, then quiet in a worse way than either. "He's trying to buy Marcus," she said. "My dad trusted that man with everything, and Blake's out there trying to buy him like a used truck." "Marcus didn't sell." "I know that's not the part sitting wrong with me. The part sitting wrong is that Blake's own blood, and he'd burn every relationship my father spent 30 years building just to win a deadline." We didn't sleep much, and the next morning, Tyler Brooks showed up at the barn looking like he hadn't slept either, standing at the door working his hat around in his hands the same way Marcus had the night before. "Miss Maya, I gotta tell you something, and I'd rather you hear it from me than from him." He wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Blake called me too, Tuesday night. Offered me foreman pay if I'd say the horses were being neglected before you took over. Said it wouldn't hurt anybody, just paperwork. Said nobody would even check." The yard went dead quiet. Marcus stepped up beside her, jaw tight, waiting to see which way this landed. "I didn't say yes," Tyler said fast, words tripping over each other. "I swear I didn't say yes. I got scared, and I sat on it 2 days trying to figure out what to do, and that was wrong of me. I know that now. I wanted you to hear it from me before it came from somewhere else." Maya's hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "How much did he offer you?" "Triple what I'm making now. Said it'd only take one conversation with a lawyer." "And you're telling me this because your daddy gave me my first job on this ranch when I was 17 and didn't know a lead rope from a lariat, and he never once made me feel stupid for asking questions. I'm not selling that out for a paycheck. Took me longer to say so than it should have, and I'm sorry for that." Maya looked at him a long moment. "Thank you for telling me, Tyler. That took more than most people have in them." She didn't smile, not exactly, but something in her face settled, hard and certain. Blake wasn't just circling anymore. He was reaching into her own barn for a knife, and it hadn't worked. 2 days later, I was up on the barn roof replacing shingles that had been threatening to give out for a year when Maya came running into the yard, boots throwing mud with every step. "Cole! Blake's here! He's got buyers with him!" I came off that roof too fast, missed the last 2 rungs of the ladder, and hit the yard in time to see Blake walking 2 men in shiny city shoes across the horse pasture like he already owned every blade of grass under them, gesturing at the land the way a man gestures at something he's already sold in his head. Maya got there first, planted herself square in front of all 3, mud past her ankles, chin up, arms crossed. "This ranch is not for sale." "Maya, let's not do this in front of guests." Blake's voice had lost some of its earlier polish. "You can't run this place alone, and everybody here knows it. Get off my property before you waste any more of these gentlemen's time. There's nothing here for them to buy, and there never will be." The heavyset investor, Richard Kessler, glanced at his partner, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Maybe we should reschedule," he muttered, low, like he thought nobody else could hear him over the mud sucking at everybody's boots. "There's nothing to reschedule," Maya said, before Blake could answer. "This land isn't listed, isn't listing, and isn't going to be. I'd apologize for wasting your morning, gentlemen, except it wasn't me who wasted it." Blake's face went red under his tan. You really think this is over? You think a folder of paid invoices wins this? I've got a filing in front of a judge right now questioning whether this marriage even meets the legal standard the will requires. I'd enjoy your little victory lap while it lasts, cousin, because it's not going to last long. He spun on his heel and marched the two men back to the Escalade, spraying gravel again on his way out. Marcus, standing by the barn door with a bucket in each hand, watched him go and allowed himself the smallest smile I'd seen out of him all week. But that filing sat heavy in my chest the rest of the day. Blake wasn't bluffing anymore. He was building a case, and Friday was closing in fast enough that I could feel it in my back teeth. "You think he's got anything?" Maya asked me that night, staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping. "I think he's got a lawyer with an hourly rate and not much else. But I think we ought to have every piece of paper this ranch has ever generated sitting on Vance's desk before Friday morning, just in case I'm wrong." Thursday night, the storm that had been threatening the valley all week finally broke loose. Winds sideways off the mountains, rain hard enough to sting bare skin, and around 11, a massive old cottonwood that had probably stood on that property since before anybody's grandparents were born came down across the far paddock fence like it weighed nothing at all. The horses didn't wait to see what happened next. A dozen head of the Stone Ranch's breeding stock blew straight through the broken line toward the highway, panicked, lightning turning the whole pasture stark white every few seconds, like a strobe nobody asked for. I've never moved that fast in my life. Maya was already outside and nothing but a barn coat and boots by the time I got the truck around. Marcus met us at the gate with 2 more hands he'd called in from town. Everybody soaked through in under a minute. The power went out somewhere in the middle of it, plunging the whole ranch into dark, broken only by headlights and lightning itself. And for a second, standing in that mud with the wind screaming through the cottonwoods still standing, I genuinely didn't know if we were going to get all of them back. Hours, that's what it took. Hours of freezing mud and rain coming down like the sky had a grudge against every one of us, chasing spooked horses through pitch dark with nothing but flashlights. A lot of yelling, and whatever luck the valley had left over that night. We got most of them turned back toward the gate one at a time, Marcus and the hands working the flanks, while Maya and I pushed the middle. One of the yearlings went down hard in a drainage ditch, running full speed in the dark, and for a second I thought we'd lost her clean. But she scrambled back up on her own, favoring a front leg, and Maya got a lead rope on her before she could bolt again. "Easy, easy," Maya kept saying, voice pitched low under the thunder, walking that limping yearling back toward the barn, one careful step at a time, while the storm did everything it could to convince her to let go. Then the big gray stallion broke loose from the group entirely, easily the most valuable animal on the whole property, sire to half the foals born there in the last 3 years, and came thundering straight toward Maya out of the dark, wild-eyed, headed dead for the highway shoulder where headlights were already slowing down, brake lights flaring red through the rain. I screamed her name. She didn't run. She planted her feet in that mud, threw her arms wide like she could make herself bigger than she was, and yelled something raw and wordless into that storm that I still can't fully describe. For one full second, I honestly thought I was about to watch the worst thing of my entire life happen right in front of me, close enough to reach and not fast enough to stop it. The stallion swerved, slowed, circled once, snorting, ears pinned flat, and let her get a hand on his halter, talking low and steady the whole time like she'd done exactly this 1,000 times before, instead of never in her life, and walked him back toward the gate like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened at all. My heart didn't slow down for another 10 minutes after that. Marcus clapped a hand on her shoulder once we'd finally gotten the last horse penned and the gate wired shut, both of them mud past their knees, water running steady off the brims of their hats. "You did good tonight, Maya." She just nodded, too wrung out to say much of anything back, and looked over at me across that ruined pasture like she needed to check I was still standing there too. We didn't get back to my kitchen table until past 3 in the morning, both of us covered head to boot in mud, hands still shaking from cold and adrenaline in about equal measure. I found her one of my old hoodies out of the hall closet, way too big on her, sleeves hanging past her fingertips, and she wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee like it was the only warm thing left in the entire world. I thought I lost him. Meaning the stallion. Maybe meaning something bigger than that, too. For a second out there, I really thought... You didn't. You didn't hesitate, she said, looking up at me over the rim of that mug. Out there. The second that horse turned toward the highway, you just came running, full speed, straight at him. Wasn't a decision to make. You were the one standing in front of him. That yearling could have broken a leg in that ditch. The stallion could have gone straight through a windshield doing 60 on the highway. Any one of us could have ended up under a hoof out there in the dark, and none of it would have been anybody's fault. My dad used to say, that's the part nobody tells you about this life. How much of it just comes down to luck holding for one more night? He ran this place 30 years on exactly that math. Never once let it stop him. She looked at me for a long moment after that, quiet, like she was turning something over in her hands that she hadn't expected to find lying around at 3 a.m, covered in mud. Cole. She said my name careful, like she was testing the weight of it. Can I ask you something, and you actually answer honest, the way we agreed? Always. Is this still just the deal to you? Because it stopped being that for me somewhere around tonight, and I don't know if I'm the only one who feels that. And I need to know before Friday, not after. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it right. Outside, the last of the storm was rolling east over the ridgeline, and somewhere out in the dark, a horse nickered low in the barn, settling in for what was left of the night. No, I said finally. Hasn't been just the deal to me for a while now either. Wasn't going to say anything with a Friday deadline still hanging over both our heads. Didn't feel fair to either one of us, mixing that up with everything else you had riding on this week. She didn't say anything back to that, just nodded, slow, like she'd needed to hear it said out loud more than she needed anything else that whole storm-soaked night. And we sat there at that table until the coffee went cold and the sky outside started going gray at the edges. Whatever happens tomorrow, she finally said, I'm glad it was you who answered that door. Wasn't going to be anybody else. Friday morning, the deadline bearing down like a freight train nobody could slow down anymore, we walked into the office of Arthur Vance, the family lawyer who'd handled Stone Ranch business since before Maya was even born. The waiting room still had David Stone's old business card taped inside a frame on the wall, next to a dozen others from ranchers Vance had represented over 3 decades in that same building. Maya paused in front of it for just a second on her way in, like she needed the reminder of exactly what she was walking in there to protect. Blake was already seated, legs crossed, a fresh folder of his own resting on his lap like a man who figured he'd already won this one on paperwork alone. Mr. Vance, he started, before either of us had even taken a seat. Before we get to the sentimental part, I'd like to enter this into the record. He slid the folder across the desk. A filing questioning whether a 5-day courthouse marriage meets the legal spirit of my uncle's will. I've got a colleague of yours in Missoula who agrees it's worth a judge's attention. Vance opened it without a word, adjusting his glasses, taking his time reading through the first page while Blake sat there looking pleased with himself. Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and set her own folder down, squared up neat at the corners. Every feed and vet invoice from the last month, paid in full, no balance owed anywhere on this ranch. She slid the folder an inch closer to Vance. New supplier agreements at better rates than my father ever negotiated in 30 years of running this place. And this. One more sheet, slid across last. Signed by Marcus Reed and every single hand on the payroll, confirming they recognize my operational control of this ranch. Not yours, Blake. Mine. That proves she can get people to sign things. It doesn't prove, speaking of that, Maya's voice went cold in a way I hadn't heard from her yet. You want to explain to Mr. Vance, why you called my head wrangler last Wednesday, offering him triple wages to lie under oath about how this ranch was running before I took over. Or why you called Tyler Brooks Tuesday night with the same offer. Blake's face did something complicated. I don't know what you're talking about. The office door opened behind us. Tyler Brooks stood in it, hat in his hands, looking like he'd rather be mucking every stall on the property than standing in that room. I do, he said. I can say it to your face if I need to, Mr. Vance. He called me Tuesday night and offered me foreman pay to say the horses weren't being cared for right. Blake's confidence cracked for the first time all morning. This is exactly what I mean. He turned to Vance, red climbing up his neck now, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. The three of them, ganging up, coaching hired hands to say whatever gets them the outcome they want. Nobody coached me, Tyler said, steady. I came here on my own because it was the right thing to do. You can ask me anything you want under oath. I'll say the same thing twice. Vance took his time, working through every page in that folder, adjusting his glasses twice, checking one signature against another, then setting the note about Blake's phone calls to one side, separate from the rest, like it was evidence for a different matter entirely. Mr. Stone, he said to Blake, not looking up yet, attempting to induce witnesses to misrepresent operational facts is the kind of thing that tends to complicate a man's standing rather than help it. I'd think carefully before you continue down that road with me sitting across from you. He turned the last page, set it down, and finally looked up. Not at Maya, at Blake. As for the filing, the marriage satisfies the will's stated condition in full, and I'd be surprised if any judge in this county entertained a challenge built on nothing but your discomfort with the outcome. The documentation provided here more than satisfies any reasonable question of operational competence. Frankly, Mr. Stone, it's more thorough than most quarterly reports I see from established operations. Full control of the estate transfers to Maya Harper, effective immediately. This matter is closed. Blake stood up so fast his chair nearly went over backward, looked at Maya, then at me, then at Tyler, like he wanted to say something else and couldn't find a version of it that wouldn't make things worse. Didn't say another word, just walked out of that office and didn't look back once. And I heard his Escalade peel out of the parking lot hard enough that Vance's assistant looked up from her desk. Tyler let out a breath like he'd been holding it since Tuesday. I really thought he was going to have me arrested for something just for showing up. You did good, Maya told him. Better than good. Outside by the trucks, the storm from the night before had finally cleared out completely, leaving behind that scrubbed-clean Montana sky you only get after a hard rain's had a full day to settle. Maya was quiet, turning her ring around on her finger, looking at it like she was seeing it for the first time since Patty Voss stamped that license. It's over, she said. Ranch is safe, pressure's off. She looked up at me, and something in her voice went careful, almost bracing for an answer she didn't want. You don't have to hold up your end of this anymore, Cole. If you want out, dissolve it. Whatever paperwork that takes on your end, I won't hold you to a single word of it. You already did more for me than I had any right to ask a neighbor for. I took her hand before she could finish turning that ring another full circle around her finger. Maya. I waited until she actually looked up at me. I didn't marry you to check a box on a will. I stayed because somewhere in that mud last night, watching you walk that stallion back to the gate like it was nothing, I figured out I didn't want any of this to end today. I wanted to keep going. That's the plain truth of it, far as I can put words to it. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at me for a long second, like she was checking whether I actually meant it, or was just saying something a man's supposed to say standing in a parking lot after a week like the one we'd just had. Whatever she found in my face must have been enough, because she didn't let go of my hand, and she didn't look away either. So what happens now? She asked, quiet. Same thing that was always going to happen, far as I'm concerned. Except now it's not paperwork. Now it's just true. She laughed a little at that, wet-eyed, The kind of laugh that comes right after a person's been holding their breath for a week and finally lets it go all at once. My dad would have liked you, you know. Before any of this, he always did. I liked him too. Wasn't hard. We stood there by the trucks a while longer, not saying much else, because some things don't need more words piled on top of them once the true part's already been said out loud. The evening sun broke through the last of the Montana clouds that night, laying gold clean across both our pastures, mine and hers, running side by side along the same stretch of Bitterroot Valley they'd shared for 30 years under two different last names. They're not really two ranches anymore. Haven't been, not in any way that matters, since that Friday afternoon outside Arthur Vance's office. My name's still Cole Harper. Hers is Maya Harper too now, for real this time. Not just ink drying on a courthouse form Patty Voss stamped without asking a single question out loud. Funny thing, signing a piece of paper to settle a debt I figured I owed a dead man. Never once expected it to turn into the truest thing I've ever put my name to. Marcus still calls her Miss Maya, out of habit more than formality now, and she still corrects him half the time and lets it slide the other half. Tyler Brooks stuck around too, and nobody's ever brought up that Tuesday night phone call again. Not because it stopped mattering, but because he showed up when it counted. And out here, that's the part people remember. The plaque on the old tack room door still reads Stone Ranch, and neither one of us has any plans to change it. Some names are worth keeping exactly the way the person who earned them left it. David Stone built something that outlasted him by 30 years and one hard Friday deadline. And out here, that's about as close to forever as anybody gets. Blake never came back around, not once. Not even to collect the last of his things from the house he never actually lived in. Last I heard, he'd moved to Bozeman, still talking about land deals to anybody who'll sit still long enough to listen. I don't think about him much. There's not a lot of room left for that once you've got 2 ranches worth running and a wife who catches a padded invoice faster than you can finish your coffee. Some nights, if the light's right and the horses are settled, Maya and I still sit out on the porch and watch the sun go down gold over both pastures. And I think about that knock on my door, the one that scared me half to death and turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to this place. Funny how a man can spend his whole life waiting for something without knowing that's what he was doing. And then one soaked through Sunday night, there it is, standing right there on the porch, asking for help he never once regretted giving.
Would you marry a stranger to save a family legacy? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories.